Tonight, we are traveling to the deepest reaches of the open ocean to witness one of nature's survival strategies. Just a few hundred meters beneath the ocean's surface, sunlight collapses, color fades, shadows thin, and below that invisible line, life enters a world where being seen can become dangerous. Near the surface, most life survives by visibility. Color signals danger or desire. Patterns break up outlines. Camouflage hides bodies against bark, sand, or stone. Visibility shapes life above, but far below, the rules change. In the deepest parts of the ocean, many animals do not try to stand out. They do not blend in. They do not imitate their surroundings. They nearly vanish. Entire bodies allow light to pass straight through. Some species lack pigment entirely. Others rearrange their organs, reducing internal shadows that might reveal them. This is not a rare coincidence. As scientists lower cameras deeper into the ocean, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The farther down we look, the more transparent life becomes. It appears again and again across species that are not closely related. Fish, crustaceans, mollusks, gelatinous drifters, all arriving at the same solution. Evolution does not stumble into it once, it returns to it repeatedly. But what kind of environment makes disappearing so effective? And why does this pattern grow stronger the deeper life descends? Tonight, we'll begin a gentle descent into that unseen world, drifting alongside creatures shaped not by display, but by absence. But before we do, if you enjoy slow, soothing explorations like this, calm journeys through the quieter corners of science, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like and perhaps tapped subscribe. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where you're winding down from tonight and what time it is there. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together we'll sink gently into the unseen depths of the ocean. Sunlight does not vanish all at once when it enters the ocean. It thins gradually, filtered by motion, depth, and the simple weight of water pressing above it. At the surface, light still behaves much as it does in air, scattering freely, filling space, outlining movement. But only a short distance below, its character begins to change, softened and narrowed, stretched thinner with every downward meter. Water is not an empty medium. It absorbs and bends light constantly. Longer wavelengths fade first. Reds slip away almost immediately, followed by oranges and yellows, leaving behind colder hues that penetrate slightly farther. Greens linger briefly, then dissolve as well. What remains is a blue glow that grows weaker, dimmer, less reliable. Shapes that once carried color lose their definition, becoming flatter, quieter, less anchored to their surroundings. As depth increases, the direction of light also changes. Sunlight no longer arrives from all angles. It funnels downward from above, forming a pale ceiling rather than an enveloping glow. Objects beneath it are lit unevenly, bright on top, shadowed below. Bodies become silhouettes rather than surfaces. Movement creates contrast where color no longer can. By a few hundred meters, the ocean has already erased most of what surface vision depends on. Patterns stop breaking outlines because outlines themselves dominate perception. Texture matters less than shape. Any solid form interrupts the remaining light, casting faint shadows that drift slowly through the water. Even stillness does not guarantee concealment, because the water itself carries light past edges, revealing what blocks its path. Deeper still, sunlight weakens into a trace, present more as suggestion than illumination. It no longer reaches sideways. It does not bounce. It simply sinks, thinning until it can no longer describe the space it passes through. At this point, the ocean is not dark in the way a room is dark. It is stripped of reference, lacking contrast, depth cues and visual certainty. The difference between seeing and not seeing becomes subtle rather than absolute, yet vision does not disappear. It transforms. In this environment, eyes are not gathering color or detail. They are registering interruption, the smallest deviation in an otherwise uniform field. A slight dimming, a passing edge, a movement where nothing should move. Light becomes less about revealing form and more about betraying presence. This gradual erasure creates a layered world rather than a single boundary. There is no clean line where visibility ends. Instead, there is a long descent where seeing becomes increasingly risky for those who produce strong visual signals. The ocean does not simply remove light, it reshapes how light behaves, narrowing its usefulness, sharpening its consequences, and quietly redefining what it means to be visible at all. In this altered visual landscape, survival is no longer tied to brightness or display. It is tied to how little a body interferes with what little light remains, and how easily it can pass through without leaving a trace. Long before darkness takes hold, subtle changes begin to ripple through the water. Not far below the surface, where sunlight still filters down and the sea retains a faint sense of color and shape, some bodies already start to lose their solidity. Transparency does not wait for night. It arrives quietly, early in the descent, threaded into layers where light still exists but behaves differently than it does above. In these upper depths, vision remains possible, yet it grows increasingly unreliable. Light still reaches living bodies, but it does not wrap around them evenly. Reflections sharpen, edges harden. A single movement can stand out too clearly against the shifting background of open water. There is no sand to press against, no reef to echo shape or texture. Everything hangs suspended, exposed on all sides, outlined by whatever light remains. It is here that transparency first appears, not as complete invisibility, but as a soft reduction. Pigment thins, tissues grow clearer, internal structures shift closer together, minimizing contrast. These early forms are not fully vanished, yet they disturb the surrounding light less than their opaque neighbors. Even a small reduction in visual presence offers an advantage in water where hiding places do not exist. This emergence so close to the surface reveals something important. Crushing pressure has not yet asserted itself. Temperature has not dropped to extremes. Food, while uneven, is still present. The forces shaping bodies here are not the deep ocean's most dramatic ones. Instead, the dominant pressure is visibility itself, the way light exposes anything solid drifting in open space. Predators already patrol these layers, scanning for interruptions rather than color. A body that reflects too much light or casts a faint shadow becomes easier to track. Transparency dulls those signals. It blurs the boundary between organism and water, reducing the clarity with which a shape announces itself. Even partial transparency can soften the moment when an eye locks onto movement. This pattern appears across very different forms of life. Small crustaceans drifting just below sunlit waters, early stage fish suspended between surface and depth, delicate gelatinous animals pulsing slowly through the blue. They share little ancestry, yet they respond in the same quiet way. Their bodies begin to surrender opacity, where vision still operates, but concealment is scarce. The early arrival of transparency suggests that disappearance is not merely a response to darkness, but to exposure. It is shaped by the risks of being seen rather than the absence of light itself. In these mid layers, the ocean teaches a lesson that deepens with every meter below. Visibility carries cost. Solid presence draws attention. Even faint outlines matter. As transparency takes hold here, it marks the first step in a longer transformation, not a sudden leap into invisibility, but a gradual easing away from solidity, a body learning, layer by layer, how to exist in water without announcing itself. In this shallow beginning, evolution begins to favor those who interfere less with light, long before that light finally fades. In the layers where color has already thinned into memory, predators continue to move with purpose. Their world is not empty or blind, it is tuned differently. Vision here is not about hue or brightness, but about interruption, the slightest disturbance in a field that has grown uniform and spare. What matters is not what something looks like, but that it is there at all. Many deep ocean hunters are built to read motion with extreme sensitivity, a slow drift against a still background, a change in direction that does not belong to the water itself, a rhythm that repeats just enough to stand out. These cues linger longer than color ever could. Even a gentle pulse can separate a living body from the surrounding dark blue haze. Edges matter just as much. Where a solid form bends or blocks the remaining light, a boundary appears. It may be faint, barely detectable, but in an environment stripped of visual clutter, faint is often enough. Predators respond not to details, but to contrast, the thin line where something ends and the water resumes. A single outline can define a target. Some hunters rely on upward viewing, tracking shapes against the dim glow filtering down from above. In this orientation, bodies become dark forms against a lighter ceiling. Any opacity sharpens that contrast. Others scan horizontally, noticing differences in brightness as bodies pass through the narrow columns of light that remain. In both cases, solidity becomes a liability. Movement amplifies every signal. A transparent body drifting slowly may go unnoticed, but a solid one leaves a clearer trace as it displaces water and light together. Even subtle motion creates a ripple of contrast. Predators trained to read these disturbances can follow them with remarkable precision, conserving energy by striking only when certainty replaces chance. Color offers little help in this process. At these depths, pigments neither warn nor conceal. They simply block light, strengthening outlines and shadows. Many predators no longer see red or yellow as distinct information. Their eyes and sensory systems prioritize brightness, gradients, angles, and change over time. The visual world simplifies, and danger sharpens. Other senses often work alongside vision, reinforcing its signals. Water movement carries vibrations. Pressure shifts ripple outward from swimming bodies. These inputs guide attention, narrowing focus toward places where vision then confirms presence. A faint outline aligned with a subtle motion becomes enough to trigger pursuit. Visibility, even reduced to its simplest elements, remains central. As a result, survival here depends less on appearance and more on interference. The safest body is one that alters the environment as little as possible. Transparency blurs edges. Slow movement softens disturbance. Together, they reduce the cues predators rely on most. In this visual economy, being seen is the primary risk, not seen as color or pattern, but as existence. A body that announces itself through contrast or motion becomes legible in a world where legibility invites attention. Over time, evolution favors forms that leave fewer marks behind, bodies that slip through light rather than stopping it. In the absence of color, perception narrows, and invisibility becomes a measurable advantage. Between the surface and the seafloor lies a vast space that belongs to neither. It is not anchored or enclosed, it drifts. In this open water, there is no boundary to press against, no structure to borrow shape from. Life exists suspended, held in place only by buoyancy and slow movement through a column of water that offers nothing to hide behind. On the seafloor, danger is uneven. Rocks interrupt sightlines. Sediment softens outlines. Crevices fracture the visual field into fragments where bodies can pause, tuck in, or vanish briefly. Even darkness settles differently along the bottom, pooling and breaking around uneven terrain. Cover exists, not everywhere, but often enough to matter. Midwater offers none of this. There are no shadows cast by cliffs, no textures to dissolve edges. Light, whatever remains of it, travels freely through empty space. Any solid form becomes the most distinct feature in view simply because nothing else competes with it. In this environment, presence alone is exposure. Currents move everything gently, but they do not conceal. A drifting body cannot press against a surface to steady itself. It cannot align with a background. It can only exist as itself, outlined against water that stretches in every direction. Even slow motion becomes noticeable because there is nothing to interrupt it. Stillness does not guarantee safety because the eye has nothing else to rest on. Predators cruising through open water benefit from this simplicity. They do not need to search complex landscapes or scan crowded scenes. Their attention is drawn to the rare interruption, the single object that breaks uniformity. Detection becomes easier not because predators are stronger, but because the environment strips away noise. Energy constraints sharpen this danger. Chasing prey across long distances is costly, so predators rely on certainty. Open water provides that certainty by reducing ambiguity. A detected body is unlikely to escape notice because there is nowhere to flee except deeper or farther, both requiring movement that reinforces visibility. In response, survival strategies here turn inward. Instead of building barriers or weapons, bodies adapt to avoid being registered at all. Transparency becomes a substitute for shelter. Where rock and plant are absent, tissue takes on the role of cover by allowing light to pass through rather than stopping it. A transparent body does not announce itself as an object. It becomes a subtle distortion rather than a solid target. This shift changes the balance of the entire environment. Strength matters less than restraint. Speed gives way to drift. Visibility becomes a cost to be minimized rather than an asset to be displayed. In open water, anything that reflects, absorbs, or blocks light too strongly is highlighted by default. Over time, this pressure sculpts a community shaped by absence rather than presence. Forms become simpler, edges soften, density drops. What survives here are not the creatures best adapted to fight, but those best adapted to pass unnoticed through space that offers no refuge. In midwater, the environment itself enforces the rule. With no shelter to inherit, life learns to replace it from within, becoming less visible in a place where visibility is the greatest risk of all. A body drifting through deep water does not need to hide its outline if the outline barely exists. In many deep-sea animals, the solution to visibility is not external at all. It is written into the material they are made of, into the quiet physics of flesh that behaves more like the water around it than an object passing through. Most of these animals are composed largely of water, held together by sparse networks of cells and delicate internal scaffolding. Their tissues are not dense or layered in the way surface bodies often are. Instead, they are soft, diffuse, and evenly structured, allowing light to pass through with minimal interruption. Where solid muscle would stop light and cast a shadow, these tissues let it bend, scatter, and continue. Light behaves differently when it encounters matter that closely matches the water itself. Instead of reflecting sharply or creating clear edges, it slows slightly, curves gently, and moves on. The boundary between body and environment becomes blurred. There is no clean line to mark where an organism ends and the ocean resumes. The body becomes a region of altered flow rather than a distinct shape. Internal composition matters just as much. Dense organs create contrast, even inside otherwise clear tissue. Many deep sea animals reduce this problem by rearranging what must remain solid. Organs cluster closer together, align along narrow axes, or shrink in relative size. Blood is often colorless or lightly tinted. Pigments are minimized. Even structural proteins are arranged to avoid sharp optical differences. As a result, shadows fade, reflections soften. Light that would normally betray presence is allowed to pass through with only subtle distortion. From a distance, such a body does not read as an object. It reads as a mild inconsistency, easily lost among the constant shifts of water and light. This approach does not require awareness or movement. It works passively, continuously, regardless of posture or speed. A drifting animal gains protection simply by existing in a form that interferes as little as possible with its surroundings. Body chemistry itself becomes a kind of camouflage, tuned not to color or pattern, but to physics. There are costs to this design. Soft bodies are easily damaged, structural support is limited, strength gives way to flexibility. Yet, in an environment where pressure is relentless and food is scarce, these traits align with other survival needs. Being mostly water lowers energy demands. Flexibility tolerates depth. Transparency arrives as part of a larger pattern of efficiency. Over long spans of time, evolution refines this composition again and again. Different lineages arrive at similar material solutions, not because they share ancestry, but because the ocean rewards the same physical properties. Less density, fewer sharp boundaries, minimal contrast. In the deep, the challenge is not building armor or speed, but dissolving presence. By shaping bodies that bend light instead of blocking it, life reduces the chance of being noticed at all. The solution is quiet, chemical, and complete. Visibility is solved, not by escape, but by construction. Force is expensive in the deep. Every movement presses against water that resists without yielding. Every burst of speed sends ripples outward. Every dense structure demands energy to maintain. In this quiet environment, fragility is not a flaw. It is a refinement, shaped by conditions where restraint preserves life more reliably than strength. Many deep-sea animals are delicate by surface standards. Their bodies lack heavy armor, their muscles are thin, their movements are slow and measured. This is not vulnerability in the usual sense. It is an adjustment to a place where exertion carries risk and attention. A powerful stroke or sudden turn does more than move a body, it announces it. Slow motion softens detection. When a creature drifts rather than surges, it blends more easily with the constant movement of water itself. Currents sway gently, particles fall like quiet snow. Against this background, haste stands out. Fragile bodies tend to move only when necessary, conserving momentum, letting buoyancy and gravity do much of the work. Their presence registers less clearly to watching eyes. Low density plays a central role in this economy. Bodies built with fewer heavy components require less energy to hold aloft. Neutral buoyancy allows animals to hover without effort, avoiding the need for constant correction. This stillness reduces the visual and mechanical disturbances that predators track. Even internal processes slow, tuned to scarcity rather than abundance. Energy is precious in the deep. where food arrives unpredictably and often in small amounts. Every calorie saved extends survival. Fragile bodies cost less to build and less to repair. They tolerate long periods without feeding. They avoid wasteful displays of power that offer no real advantage in open water. Efficiency becomes the dominant measure of success. Armor, while protective near the surface, brings disadvantages here. Dense shells and rigid structures reflect light, cast shadows, and increase mass. They demand greater force to move and greater resources to sustain. In contrast, delicate tissues flex with pressure, yield without breaking, and fade visually into their surroundings. What looks weak in shallow water becomes well suited to depth. Behavior and body design reinforce one another. Fragile animals often adopt calm rhythms, gentle pulses, and long pauses. Movement becomes intentional rather than reactive. This quiet existence reduces encounters altogether. Survival improves not by enduring attacks, but by avoiding them. Over time, evolution favors this balance. Species that invest less in force and more in persistence quietly outlast those that rely on power. Fragility aligns with transparency, flexibility, and low energy demand, forming a coherent strategy shaped by the deep itself. In this environment, safety is not found in resistance, but in subtlety. To be delicate is to interfere less, to cost less, to signal less. Fragility becomes an advantage not because danger disappears, but because attention does. Across the long history of life in the ocean, transparency does not appear once and spread outward. It emerges again and again, separated by time, lineage, and form. Bodies shaped by entirely different ancestral paths arrive at the same quiet solution, as if guided by an underlying rule written into the water itself. Fish develop clear flesh and near invisible heads. Crustaceans thin their shells until they barely interrupt light. Mollusks soften and fade, abandoning heavy protection. Gelatinous animals build themselves almost entirely from water, taking transparency to its extreme. These groups share little genetic similarity, yet their bodies converge toward the same optical state. This pattern is not inherited from a single origin, it is rediscovered. Such repetition signals more than coincidence. When evolution returns to the same trait independently, it reflects a pressure that is persistent, widespread, and difficult to avoid. In the open ocean and the deep, the environment applies that pressure continuously. Light behaves in specific ways. Predators perceive inconsistent patterns. Energy remains scarce. Under these conditions, certain body designs simply work better than others. Transparency offers advantages that compound rather than specialize. It reduces detection without requiring active behavior. It aligns with low density, flexibility, and reduced metabolic cost. It functions across a wide range of sizes and lifestyles, from drifting larvae to adult predators. Because it solves multiple challenges at once, it remains stable once it appears. Over evolutionary time, species that stumble upon partial transparency gain a small edge. That edge does not guarantee survival, but it improves odds often enough to matter. Small benefits accumulate. Tissues grow clearer. Pigment fades. Internal structures reorganize. Each change nudges the body closer to a form that interferes less with its surroundings. What makes this pattern striking is its consistency across vastly different organisms. Some transparent animals swim with fins, others pulse, crawl, or drift. Some hunt, others filter. Yet all face the same basic constraint. In a place where being noticed increases risk, Bodies that announce themselves less tend to persist longer. Evolution does not plan this outcome. It tests endlessly, retaining what endures. The ocean reinforces this lesson across millions of years. Lineages that fail to reduce visibility vanish quietly. Those that succeed leave descendants that refine the trait further. Transparency spreads not because it is perfect, but because alternatives perform worse under the same conditions. Even when transparency is incomplete, its partial forms are favored: a clearer head, a lighter blood pigment, a rearranged organ cluster. These incremental steps demonstrate that invisibility is not binary. It exists along a gradient, and evolution climbs that gradient wherever the environment rewards it. Seen from this scale, transparency becomes less mysterious and more inevitable. Given enough time, enough variation, and the same environmental filters, life repeatedly arrives at the same answer. Different starting points converge on the same outcome. In the deep ocean, evolution keeps repeating transparency because the problem never changes. Light fades, predators remain, energy stays limited. The simplest solution persists. Bodies that fade into water endure, and the pattern continues, written softly into flesh across the ages. Light returns to the deep in brief, deliberate flashes. It does not arrive from above or linger in the water. It is made, generated within bodies, released in pulses, sparks, and soft glows that momentarily rewrite the visual rules of the environment. In these moments, darkness is interrupted by life itself. Bioluminescence is widespread in the deep ocean. Many animals carry the ability to produce light through chemical reactions contained within specialized tissues. The glow can be blue, green, or pale white, tuned to the wavelengths that travel farthest in water. It may appear as a point, a line, or a diffuse wash that fades almost as soon as it forms. When light appears here, it changes everything for an instant. Nearby bodies become visible not because they reflect sunlight, but because they are illuminated from within reach of the glow. Shapes emerge from absence, edges sharpen, distance collapses. For predators and prey alike, a single flash can reveal more than minutes of passive watching. This creates a paradox. Light can attract food, confuse attackers, or communicate with others of the same species, yet it also carries risk. A glowing body announces itself, and the light it emits can betray anything close enough to catch its spill. In such a sparse environment, even a brief glow travels farther than expected. Transparency alters this balance. When a transparent body produces light, much of that light passes through without striking dense tissue. It spreads softly instead of catching on surfaces that would otherwise flare and reflect. Internal structures do not throw sharp shadows. The glow becomes diffuse, less likely to outline the body producing it. For nearby animals, transparency offers similar protection. A transparent creature drifting near a luminous flash is less likely to be revealed by it. Light slides through rather than stopping abruptly. The moment of exposure becomes weaker, shorter, and harder to interpret. Illumination still occurs, but its ability to define shape is reduced. Some deep-sea animals combine these traits intentionally. Light organs are positioned to minimize self-exposure. Glows may be directed downward or outward rather than back across the body. Transparent tissues ensure that even when light is active, it does not turn the animal into a silhouette against its own signal. In this way, bioluminescence does not undo the advantage of invisibility. It reshapes it. Light becomes a tool rather than a liability when the body emitting it does not strongly interact with it. Transparency allows animals to use light selectively without paying the full cost of being seen. As bioluminescence spreads through deep sea communities, transparency grows alongside it. The two traits reinforce one another, solving complementary problems. One produces light, the other ensures that light does not linger where it becomes dangerous. In a world where darkness dominates, light is powerful and fleeting. When it passes through living bodies instead of stopping at their edges, its risk softens. The rules shift again. Visibility becomes temporary. Presence becomes harder to fix in space. Even when life lights up the deep, those who let that light pass through remain the least defined. Eyes impose a shape that cannot fade. No matter how refined the surrounding body becomes, the organs built to receive light remain stubbornly solid. They require lenses, pigments, nerves, and layered tissues that must stop light in order to measure it. In an environment where interruption reveals presence, this necessity turns vision into a risk. An eye gathers light by concentrating it. That concentration produces contrast. Dark pigment absorbs stray photons. Curved lenses bend incoming rays toward a focal point. Together, these structures create a visible form that stands apart from water that lets light pass freely. Even when the rest of the body grows faint, the eye leaves a mark. In deep water, that mark carries weight. Large eyes increase sensitivity, but they also increase visibility. Their rounded shapes catch the remaining light, forming reflective surfaces that move distinctly against the background. A single glance from the wrong angle can turn a drifting animal into a recognizable target. The advantage of seeing farther is balanced by the cost of being seen. Some species respond by reducing eye size. Smaller eyes gather less light, but they also present less surface area. The loss of detail is traded for discretion. In a place where encounters are rare and distances are short, extreme visual acuity offers diminishing returns. Precision gives way to adequacy. Seeing enough becomes safer than seeing everything. Other animals take a different approach. Instead of shrinking their eyes, they move them. Eyes may be set deep within tissue, angled downward or upward rather than forward, or positioned closer together to minimize exposed area. These adjustments do not eliminate visibility, but they soften it, changing how the eye interacts with light from different directions. In some cases, reflective layers that enhance vision near the surface are reduced or absent. Mirrors that once doubled sensitivity would now double risk. Pigments that sharpen contrast are minimized. The eye remains functional, but simplified, tuned to detect movement and brightness rather than color or detail. These changes reveal an important boundary. Transparency can spread across skin, muscle, and organ, but it halts at the eye. The physics of sight require opacity. Evolution cannot erase this constraint, only work around it. As a result, eyes become the most conspicuous feature of otherwise fading bodies. Over time, species that rely less on vision altogether gain an advantage. Touch, pressure detection, and chemical cues shoulder more of the sensory burden. The eye persists, but its dominance fades. It becomes one input among many, rather than the defining interface with the world. In the deep, seeing is no longer free. Every improvement in vision carries a visible cost. Bodies that temper their eyes, by shrinking them, hiding them, or limiting their role, reduce that cost. Survival favors those who accept imperfect sight in exchange for a quieter presence. In a realm shaped by absence, even the act of seeing must learn restraint. Predation in the deep is often imagined as pursuit, speed, and force. In reality, it is more often an exercise in approach. Distance matters. The closer a hunter can move without being noticed, the less energy it must spend, and the greater its chance of success. In this quiet geometry, transparency becomes useful not as defense, but as strategy. Some predators adopt see-through bodies for the same reason their prey do. Reduced visibility lowers the chance of early detection. A hunter that fades into the water can drift nearer before its presence registers. By the time movement is noticed, the distance remaining is small enough that escape becomes unlikely. These predators do not chase through long arcs of water. They wait, they hover, they align themselves with currents and light gradients, minimizing contrast while closing space gradually. Transparency softens the outline that would otherwise give them away, allowing their form to pass through the visual field of prey without announcing intent. In open water, even a well-adapted prey animal remains alert to disturbance. It senses edges, brightness changes, and motion. A predator that reflects light or casts a shadow triggers those alarms too early. A transparent hunter interrupts fewer signals. Its body blends into the background noise of the environment, becoming another subtle distortion rather than a clear threat. This advantage compounds with patience. Transparent predators can afford to move slowly, conserving energy while remaining unnoticed. Their strikes are brief and decisive, not prolonged. Success depends less on speed than on proximity, and proximity depends on remaining undefined for as long as possible. In some cases, transparency allows predators to operate in illuminated moments without penalty. When bioluminescent flashes occur nearby, a transparent hunter is less likely to be revealed by the light it did not produce. Its body does not flare into view. It absorbs little and reflects less. The moment passes, and the hunter remains concealed. Transparency also reduces mutual detection among predators. In crowded feeding events, visibility can escalate conflict. See-through bodies lessen competitive signals, allowing multiple hunters to occupy the same space without immediate confrontation. Energy that might be spent on defense or display remains reserved for feeding. This use of invisibility reshapes the dynamic between hunter and environment. The predator no longer dominates its surroundings through presence. It blends into them. Its success depends on restraint and subtlety rather than intimidation. Power is expressed through absence. Evolution reinforces this approach where conditions allow it. Lineages that reduce visibility gain efficiency. Failed strikes cost less. Encounters remain rare but decisive. Over time, transparency shifts from a protective measure into an offensive tool, refined through repeated use. In the deep ocean, invisibility does not belong exclusively to the hunted. It becomes a shared language, spoken by those who pursue and those who evade. When predators also fade, the balance changes. Detection becomes the limiting factor, and the hunter that interferes least with light gains the advantage. In this silent exchange, transparency serves both sides, not as neutrality, but as control. Inside some deep-sea animals, nothing is hidden. The body does not shield its workings behind thick walls or layered tissue. Instead, circulation, digestion, and movement remain visible through clear flesh, revealed not as spectacle, but as consequence. In this environment, concealment extends inward, reshaping anatomy itself. Hearts can be seen beating slowly, suspended within translucent cavities. Digestive tracts appear as faint coils, pale and simplified. Fluids move gently through vessels that lack strong color. What would seem exposed near the surface becomes unremarkable here because visibility has already been redefined. The danger lies not in being seen working, but in creating contrast. Internal organs are among the densest parts of any body. They absorb light, block it, and cast shadows even when the outer tissue is clear. For animals drifting through dim water, this internal contrast can be as revealing as an external outline. Evolution responds not by hiding organs behind armor, but by reorganizing them. Organs cluster closer together, reducing the number of light-stopping surfaces spread across the body. Instead of being distributed, dense structures align along narrow planes. This concentrates contrast into smaller regions, making the overall shape harder to resolve. From a distance, the body becomes a soft blur rather than a collection of distinct parts. Color within the body fades as well. Blood that is bright near the surface turns pale or nearly clear. Pigments that serve oxygen transport are reduced in concentration or altered in form. This is not inefficiency. It is refinement, an adjustment that lowers optical signature without compromising function in low oxygen conditions. Some structures shrink relative to body size. Stomachs grow smaller during long periods without feeding. Musculature thins. Redundancies disappear. What remains is what must exist, arranged to interfere as little as possible with the surrounding light. Transparency does not mean emptiness, it means restraint. This internal reorganization reflects a deeper rule of the environment. In open water, there is no exterior to retreat behind. The body itself becomes the final interface with risk. Anything that blocks light within it can announce presence just as clearly as an opaque shell. Over generations, this pressure reshapes bodies from the inside out. Functions remain, but their expression changes. Anatomy becomes quieter. Processes slow. Visibility fades not only at the surface, but at every internal boundary where light once stopped. The result is a form of living clarity. Organs perform their roles openly, yet without drawing attention. Life persists without emphasis. Even its most essential motions occur softly, embedded within tissue that blends with water. Survival here does not depend on hiding complexity. It depends on simplifying how complexity appears. By reorganizing internal structure to reduce contrast, deep-sea animals solve a problem that begins within. Transparency becomes complete, not when the surface disappears, but when the interior no longer interrupts the world beyond it. Color fades quietly, not as loss, but as abandonment. In the deep, it is not stripped away by force, it is set aside. Pigment becomes something the body no longer carries, like a tool left behind when it stops being useful. Color only matters when light can return from it. Near the surface, reflected wavelengths carry information, warning, attraction, disguise. In darker water, those signals weaken until they vanish entirely. When light no longer reaches a body in sufficient strength, pigment stops communicating. It absorbs energy without producing effect. Maintaining color is not passive. Pigments must be built, replaced, and regulated. Cells allocate resources to produce molecules that absorb and reflect specific wavelengths. In shallow environments, that cost is repaid through survival and reproduction. In the deep, the exchange breaks down. Light is too faint, too scattered, too brief to justify the expense. As depth increases, animals begin to reduce this investment. Colors dull. Reds disappear first, followed by yellows and greens, until only pale translucence remains. Eventually, pigment vanishes almost entirely. The body no longer carries hues that serve no purpose. This loss improves efficiency in subtle ways. Without pigment, tissues become lighter and more transparent. Light passes through rather than stopping at colored boundaries. Internal shadows soften. Visibility drops further. What begins as an energy saving measure reinforces the larger strategy of disappearance. Metabolism benefits as well. Pigment synthesis requires raw materials that could be used elsewhere, repairing cells, maintaining organs, or surviving long stretches without food. In the deep ocean, scarcity is constant. Any process that does not directly support survival is gradually reduced. The absence of color also simplifies internal chemistry. Fewer pigments mean fewer complex molecules circulating through tissue. Blood becomes paler. Organs lose distinct visual signatures. The body grows quieter, optically and energetically. This shift does not happen once or in isolation. Across unrelated species, the same pattern repeats. Where light fades, color follows. The consistency of this transition reflects the same underlying pressure felt everywhere below the sunlit layers. Energy must be spent carefully. Anything that does not contribute to concealment or function is trimmed away. In some cases, color lingers briefly in early life stages or near the upper edges of depth ranges. As individuals descend or mature, those colors fade. What remains is not deficiency, but alignment. The body matches the environment by no longer signaling in a language that cannot be received. Over long spans of time, evolution sharpens this economy. Bodies that abandon color earlier gain marginal advantages. They waste less, blend more fully, and survive a little longer. Those margins accumulate. In the deep sea, color becomes unnecessary weight. By letting it go, life moves closer to the simplest form that still works. Efficiency replaces display. What remains is not dullness, but suitability. In darkness, absence of color is not loss at all. It is precision. Hard structures once defined survival in brighter water. Shells thickened slowly. Spines grew sharp and reflective. Plates locked together into shapes that resisted teeth and claws. Near the surface, where encounters are frequent and force travels quickly, armor buys time. It absorbs impact, it deters pursuit, it turns bodies into obstacles rather than invitations. As life descends, those benefits erode. In the deep, rigid protection introduces problems that outweigh its strength. Armor adds mass in a world where buoyancy must be carefully balanced. Dense shells require energy to lift and reposition. Every correction costs calories that are already rare. What once provided safety begins to demand constant compensation. Light complicates the issue further. Hard surfaces do not fade quietly. They reflect and scatter the remaining glow, producing sharp highlights and sudden flashes that travel farther than soft tissue ever could. Edges become bright. Curves catch stray light. In an environment tuned to detect interruption, armor announces presence before contact ever occurs. Rigid structures also resist pressure poorly when they rely on empty space. Cavities compress unevenly. Stress concentrates along seams. At increasing depth, flexibility becomes safer than stiffness. Bodies that yield distribute force smoothly. Those that resist invite failure. For these reasons, armor fades from deep-sea designs. Shells thin, spines shorten or vanish. Plates fragment and soften until they are no longer distinct. The body abandons external defense not out of weakness, but alignment. Structural strength gives way to forms that suit the physical and optical realities of depth. Transparency replaces armor without claiming its costs. Instead of blocking force, the body reduces the likelihood of interaction altogether. A transparent surface reflects little and interrupts less. It does not advertise itself. It does not provide a target worth testing. The safest encounter is the one that never begins. This transition appears across many unrelated groups. Creatures whose ancestors relied heavily on rigid protection lose those traits as they descend. The change does not happen abruptly. Partial shells remain for a time, spines dull before disappearing. Over generations, the trend continues until armor becomes unnecessary weight. Structural evolution follows environment with quiet consistency. Where surfaces are crowded and light is plentiful, defense favors resistance. Where space opens and light thins, survival favors absence. Armor is replaced not by vulnerability, but by invisibility. Internal support systems adapt alongside this shift. Instead of rigid frames, deep animals rely on pressure-balanced tissues and distributed support. The body becomes a continuous structure rather than a collection of hard parts. Strength remains, but it is expressed through cohesion rather than hardness. In this context, armor offers little advantage. It slows movement, increases visibility, and complicates buoyancy. Transparency accomplishes the opposite. It lowers mass, softens outlines, and allows bodies to occupy space without announcing it. As depth increases, the ocean favors designs that interfere less with their surroundings. Armor disappears because the conditions that once rewarded it no longer exist. What remains are bodies shaped to pass through water quietly, protected not by hardness, but by not being noticed at all. Energy sets the rhythm of the deep. It moves slowly, arriving in fragments, settling briefly, then vanishing again into the dark. There is no steady supply, no seasonal abundance that can be relied upon. Food appears as falling debris, scattered prey, or rare encounters, and every arrival is uncertain. This scarcity shapes bodies at their most basic level. Metabolism slows. Processes that run constantly near the surface are stretched out here, paced to match the long gaps between meals. Every beat, every contraction, every chemical exchange is measured against cost. Nothing operates at full speed for long. In this environment, survival depends less on acquiring food and more on not wasting it. Structures that demand constant repair or high energy input become liabilities. Dense tissues require more fuel to maintain. Complex organs need steady support. Excess mass must be moved, positioned, and stabilized. Each demand draws from the same limited reserve. Over time, bodies begin to simplify. Traits that offer only marginal benefit disappear. What remains is what can persist through absence. Transparent bodies fit naturally into this economy. Being mostly water, they require fewer resources to build and less energy to sustain. Their tissues are light, flexible, and uniform, reducing the metabolic burden of upkeep. Transparency also aligns with slower physiological rhythms. Reduced muscle mass lowers baseline energy consumption. Thinner tissues shorten internal transport distances, easing circulation demands. Paler blood carries oxygen efficiently enough for low activity without requiring high concentrations of pigment. The entire system settles into balance with scarcity. This does not mean life becomes inactive. It becomes selective. Movements are deliberate. Growth is gradual. Repair happens when necessary, not continuously. Even reproduction adjusts to long intervals, with fewer events spaced across greater time. In such conditions, efficiency outweighs all other measures. A body that uses less energy does not need to find food as often. It can wait. Waiting becomes a strategy, as important as feeding itself. Transparency supports this patience by reducing both metabolic cost and exposure. Energy scarcity links traits that might otherwise seem unrelated. Loss of color saves resources. Reduced armor lowers maintenance demands. Smaller or repositioned organs consume less fuel. Transparent tissue contributes across all of these domains, easing pressure at every level. This convergence reinforces itself. Efficient bodies survive longer, and longer survival allows more opportunity for reproduction, even if those opportunities are rare. Over generations, selection favors forms that can endure extended deprivation without collapse. Strength gives way to endurance. Speed yields to persistence. Metabolism becomes the quiet architect behind every visible change. It does not sculpt dramatic features. It trims, refines, and simplifies. Each adjustment may seem small, but together they define what can exist here. In the deep ocean, food scarcity turns energy into the ultimate currency. Transparency is not merely a way to avoid attention. It is a way to spend less, to last longer, and to exist within strict limits without exceeding them. Efficiency becomes the dominant trait because nothing else can be afforded. Pressure accumulates silently. With every descent, water stacks upon itself, adding weight without sound or movement. What feels gentle at the surface becomes immense below, pressing equally from all directions, filling every space, testing every structure that resists it. Rigid forms struggle here. Stiff materials concentrate stress along edges and seams. Where force has nowhere to dissipate, cavities compress unevenly. Hard surfaces fracture or deform when pressure exceeds their tolerance. What holds its shape near the surface becomes vulnerable when the surrounding world pushes back with unbroken consistency. Soft bodies respond differently. Flexible tissues yield without failing, distributing force smoothly across their volume. Instead of resisting pressure, they accommodate it. Water presses inward, and the body presses back with equal compliance, maintaining integrity through balance rather than opposition. This exchange reduces strain and preserves form without rigidity. As depth increases, this advantage grows more pronounced. Muscles thin and stretch. Support structures become subtle and continuous rather than segmented. Fluids take on a greater role in maintaining shape. The distinction between body and environment begins to soften, not conceptually, but physically. Transparency often emerges alongside this flexibility. Materials that bend easily tend to interact less dramatically with light. They lack sharp boundaries and dense layers that would otherwise reflect or block illumination. When tissue is uniform and pliable, light passes through with minimal interruption. The physics that favor softness also favor optical subtlety. Pressure also discourages empty space. Gas-filled cavities collapse quickly at depth. Bodies that rely on them must replace air with fluid or eliminate voids altogether. This shift further encourages uniform composition. Fluids transmit pressure evenly. They move, adjust, and settle without resistance. A body built around fluid behaves predictably under load. Over time, selection favors forms that align with these physical realities. Flexibility becomes not just beneficial, but necessary. Structures that cannot adapt simply do not persist. Those that can endure depth do so by blending into it mechanically as much as visually. Physics does not act with intent, yet its influence is constant. It rewards designs that cooperate with force rather than challenge it. Transparency, softness, and flexibility cluster together because they share a common foundation. They minimize gradients, reduce points of failure, and allow the body to exist within pressure rather than against it. This shaping happens quietly, over spans far longer than any individual life. Biology responds by adjusting material, thickness, and arrangement. Muscles shorten or elongate, connective tissue loosens, boundaries blur. What remains is not weakness, but compatibility with an unforgiving environment. In the deep ocean, pressure is not an event, it is a condition. It never relents, never shifts direction, never pauses. Bodies that survive do so by becoming forms that pressure cannot easily act upon. Flexibility absorbs, transparency follows, physics guides the outcome, and biology settles into forms that endure by yielding. Transparency does not extend without boundary. It advances as far as biology allows, then slows, pressed back by the requirements of function. Even in the deepest water, some parts of life cannot dissolve into light, no matter how strong the pressure to vanish. Muscle is one such limit. To contract, it must be dense enough to pull against itself. The fibers that generate force absorb and scatter light, creating unavoidable contrast. A body can thin those fibers and reduce their number, but it cannot remove them entirely without losing the ability to move or feed. Motion always leaves some trace. Nerves impose a similar constraint. Electrical signals travel along organized tissue that must remain structured and insulated. These pathways interrupt uniformity. They introduce lines and junctions that light cannot easily cross. The more complex the nervous system becomes, the harder it is to render invisible. Size magnifies these challenges. Small bodies can approach transparency more fully because light has fewer opportunities to be blocked. As bodies grow larger, internal distances increase, organs must scale up. Circulation requires thicker vessels, support structures expand. Each addition adds density, and density leaves a signature. Large transparent animals do exist, but they tend to be uniform rather than intricate. Their success depends on simplicity of layout. When complexity rises, transparency recedes. At some scale, disappearing entirely becomes impractical. There are also tasks that require solidity. Grasping, biting, anchoring, and sensing pressure all demand physical interfaces that interact strongly with the environment. These interfaces catch light. They create edges. A body that performs many of these tasks accepts partial visibility as the cost of function. Because of these limits, transparency becomes selective rather than total. It concentrates where it offers the greatest return, in outer tissues, in reduced pigment, in softened boundaries. Other areas remain opaque, tucked inward or minimized, but not erased. Some species respond to this ceiling by shifting strategies. Instead of chasing full invisibility, they lean into darkness itself. Pigmentation returns, not for display, but for absorption. Dark bodies swallow the remaining light, creating silhouettes that blend into absence rather than clarity. In extreme depths, where illumination is nearly non-existent, this approach rivals transparency in effectiveness. These animals do not attempt to pass light through themselves. They prevent light from interacting at all. Their safety lies in environments where seeing is rare, not in bodies that can withstand scrutiny. Darkness becomes their shelter. The deep ocean allows both solutions to coexist. Transparency dominates where faint light still matters. Darkness prevails where light is too scarce to exploit. Each strategy respects the same constraints, simply choosing different responses to them. Transparency has limits because life does. Biology cannot abandon structure without abandoning function. The boundary where invisibility ends marks the point where survival requires presence, weight, and interaction. In this balance, evolution does not fail. It adapts within what is possible. Some bodies fade, others absorb. Between them lies a spectrum shaped not by preference, but by necessity. Even in a world that rewards disappearance, not everything can disappear. When a body faces directly into the water column, its visibility changes. From this angle, light does not spill across broad surfaces or trace familiar outlines. It meets a narrow profile, a geometry shaped to deny reflection rather than absorb it. In some deep-sea fish, this orientation becomes a quiet form of disappearance. These fish are not fully transparent. Instead, their bodies are arranged to minimize the amount of light that can return to an observer when viewed head-on. The frontal surface area is reduced to the smallest possible shape, tapering smoothly from snout to body. Curves replace angles, edges soften into continuous lines. From a distance, there is very little for light to strike. Scales play a role here, not as armor, but as optical modifiers. In certain species, reflective elements are flattened, tilted, or layered so that incoming light is redirected away rather than back toward its source. What reflection occurs is scattered sideways or downward, never gathered into a recognizable signal. From directly ahead, the fish blends into the water behind it. This effect depends on geometry as much as composition. A body can be moderately reflective and still appear invisible if its shape prevents light from returning to the viewer. Conversely, a highly transparent body can become visible if its orientation presents a wide surface that interrupts light flow. Direction determines outcome. Many of these fish hold themselves at precise angles. They align with the faint downward glow that persists at depth, presenting only their thinnest profile toward it. Viewed from above or below, they may appear more distinct. Viewed head-on, they nearly vanish. Invisibility becomes conditional, tuned to the most likely line of sight. This strategy reflects the realities of deep-sea perception. Predators often scan forward as they move, watching for contrast ahead rather than to the sides. A fish that minimizes its frontal signal reduces the chance of being detected during these encounters. The body does not need to disappear from every angle, only from the one that matters most. Surface area reduction also lowers the number of micro-reflections that betray presence. Broad fins fold inward, bodies elongate. Profiles stretch into forms that slip through light rather than confronting it. Even subtle changes in curvature can dramatically alter how visible a body becomes. These adaptations do not require perfect transparency. They rely on predictable physics. Light behaves differently, depending on angle, curvature, and alignment. By shaping the body to exploit those rules, fish can control how they appear without changing what they are made of. Directional invisibility also allows for movement. A fish can advance head-on, approaching prey or passing predators with minimal signal. When it turns, visibility increases, but the moment has often passed. Geometry buys time. In the deep, invisibility does not need to be absolute. It needs to be effective at the right moment. By minimizing frontal reflection, some fish solve the problem of being seen without dissolving completely. Orientation becomes camouflage. Shape becomes strategy. The body learns not only how to exist in light, but how to face it. Time behaves differently in the deep. Without sunrise or sunset to divide the hours, the ocean settles into a long, unbroken present. Light does not arrive to mark beginnings or departures. There is no daily rhythm to follow, no regular cue that signals when to rise or rest. The environment remains steady, dim, and unchanged. In this constant state, activity slows. Without cycles of brightness and shadow, there is little reason for synchronized movement. Feeding does not peak at dawn or fade at dusk. Encounters occur sporadically, shaped by chance rather than schedule. Life stretches itself across time, spreading effort thinly instead of concentrating it into bursts. Bodies adapt to this extended calm. Metabolic rhythms lengthen. Muscles remain relaxed for long intervals. Motion, when it happens, is measured and deliberate. A sudden surge carries cost and risk, drawing attention in a place where attention can linger longer than intended. Movement becomes cautious not from fear, but from logic. In a world without daily reset, disturbances persist. A ripple does not blend into background noise created by wind or waves. A displacement of water remains meaningful because so little else is changing. Stillness becomes the default state, not as dormancy, but as balance. Without a day or night to provide cover, being unseen replaces speed as the safer strategy. There is no darkness arriving to erase mistakes, no brightness leaving to provide relief. Visibility remains stable, and any signal sent into the environment can be interpreted at any time. Bodies that move slowly interfere less with this steady field. Over long spans, this temporal quiet shapes behavior deeply. Activity aligns with opportunity rather than hour. A drifting organism responds only when necessary, conserving energy and presence alike. Patience becomes ingrained, not as a conscious choice, but as a trait refined over generations. Transparency integrates seamlessly into this timeless rhythm. A body that remains hard to detect benefits continuously, not just at certain hours. There is no need to rush, to hide before light returns, or to wait for darkness to fall. The environment never changes enough to require urgency. Predators and prey alike adopt this pace. Hunts unfold slowly. Pursuit is replaced by approach. Encounters resolve quietly or not at all. The absence of daily cycles removes pressure to act within narrow windows. Survival stretches across long periods of waiting. This steady time favors endurance over intensity. Bodies that can exist without signaling, without frequent movement, persist longer. Speed loses meaning when there is no moment that demands it. Caution becomes efficient. Restraint becomes effective. In the deep sea, time no longer pushes life forward in steps. It holds life in place, allowing only gradual shifts, without day or night, to guide behavior. Existence simplifies, movement slows, activity thins. The most successful lives are those that leave the smallest trace across endless hours. Here, being unseen matters more than being fast. In a world without cycles, invisibility is always in season. Many lives begin in a form that later disappears. Before shells harden, before pigment settles into skin, before structures thicken and declare a permanent shape, countless animals exist briefly as something close to invisible. This early state is not decorative or incomplete. It is functional, tuned to a moment when survival depends on remaining unnoticed. In surface waters, early life stages drift freely. Larvae move with currents rather than against them, carried through open space without shelter or defense. At this scale, strength offers little protection. Size cannot deter predators. Speed cannot guarantee escape. What matters most is avoiding detection during the vulnerable interval when the body is still assembling itself. Transparency meets that need. Clear tissues allow light to pass through larval bodies with minimal disruption. Organs remain simple and lightly pigmented. Movement is slow and buoyant. The young animal becomes difficult to distinguish from the surrounding water, even when light is abundant. In this brief window, invisibility increases the chance of lasting long enough to grow. As development continues, many surface animals abandon this strategy. Pigments appear, muscles thicken, skeletons form. The body transitions from concealment to interaction, trading subtlety for strength and capability. Transparency fades as other traits take precedence. In the deep ocean, that transition never fully arrives. Conditions that favor early life persist indefinitely. Open water remains exposed. Shelter stays scarce. Predation pressure does not ease. The environmental risks that make transparency useful at the beginning of life near the surface remain constant at depth. This parallel is not incidental. The deep sea recreates the constraints of early development and holds them in place. A drifting larva near the surface and an adult animal in deep water face similar challenges. Both exist in open space. Both lack reliable cover. Both benefit from reduced visibility more than increased force. Developmental biology reveals this connection quietly. The transparent tissues seen in larvae are not exotic adaptations. They are basic solutions, accessible early in growth because they work. Evolution does not need to invent something new to survive at depth. It extends a familiar strategy and refuses to let it go. This continuity suggests that transparency is not a specialized trait, but a foundational one. It appears early because it solves a fundamental problem: how to exist in open water without announcing presence. Near the surface, the answer is temporary. In the deep, it becomes permanent. Some deep-sea animals retain proportions and tissue qualities reminiscent of larval forms. Their bodies remain soft. Their internal organization stays simple. Growth emphasizes extension rather than densification. This is not immaturity. It is alignment with a stable environment that never demands the transition away from early life strategies. The deep ocean, in this sense, resembles a place where development pauses at a useful stage, not frozen, but sustained. What is fleeting above becomes enduring below. By preserving traits that elsewhere belong only to beginnings, life at depth reveals a quiet truth. Survival sometimes depends not on moving forward into complexity, but on remaining where simplicity works. In the deep, early life does not end. It becomes a way of living. Human perception is built around solidity. From the earliest moments of development, the brain learns to recognize bodies by their edges, surfaces, and shadows. Faces are identified by contrast. Movement is tracked by outline. Safety and danger are assessed by how clearly a form occupies space. These instincts settle deeply and quietly, shaping how the world is interpreted without conscious effort. Transparency disrupts that system. When a body fails to declare its boundaries, the brain struggles to place it. Depth becomes ambiguous. Motion lacks a clear source. Organs visible through skin confuse expectations about inside and outside. The result is not fear in itself, but uncertainty, a brief cognitive pause where familiar rules no longer apply. This response is not learned, it is inherited. For most of human evolution, transparent bodies did not exist as part of the everyday environment. On land, solidity dominates. Bodies block light. They cast reliable shadows. Even water surfaces reflect clearly defined forms. Perception evolved to assume that living things announce themselves through presence. When that assumption fails, the mind works harder. Transparency forces perception to reconcile conflicting signals. Something moves, yet seems absent. A shape appears, yet cannot be fully grasped. This mismatch creates discomfort because it violates the brain's predictive models of how objects should behave. The deep sea intensifies this effect. It presents life forms that follow rules foreign to surface experience. Light is scarce, edges dissolve, bodies exist in gradients rather than silhouettes. When humans encounter these forms through images or video, the unease reflects not danger but distance. The environment that shaped these organisms is far removed from the one that shaped human senses. Our visual system depends on light returning from surfaces. It measures the world by reflection. Transparency removes that feedback. Light passes through rather than coming back, leaving perception with less information to work with. The brain fills the gap imperfectly, producing impressions that feel strange or unreal. This reaction reveals how tightly human perception is bound to surface conditions. We are comfortable where light behaves predictably, where objects respond in expected ways. When light no longer confirms existence, confidence fades. The mind searches for cues that are no longer there. The discomfort does not imply error, it signals difference. Transparency highlights the limits of perception tuned for a brighter, denser world. It exposes assumptions that usually go unnoticed, assumptions about bodies needing clear borders and stable interiors. In this way, unsettling responses become informative. They mark the boundary between human experience and environments shaped by other constraints. The deep ocean does not feel alien because its life is threatening, but because its logic operates outside the frame that human senses evolved to understand. Our perception is shaped by light, by how it reflects, scatters, and defines space. When life abandons those properties, it steps beyond intuitive understanding. Transparency unsettles not because it is wrong, but because it belongs to a world that did not include us. For much of scientific history, the deep ocean was sampled with tools designed for sturdier worlds. Nets were dragged through darkness, hauled back heavy with sediment and shattered remains. What survived the journey was what could endure force. What could not was often never seen at all. Fragile bodies suffered most. Soft tissues tore apart in mesh. Gelatinous forms collapsed under pressure changes. Transparent organisms, built largely of water, left little trace once damaged. When nets returned to the surface, they contained fragments, slime, or nothing that suggested a complete living form. Absence was recorded as emptiness rather than loss. As a result, early catalogs of deep-sea life skewed heavily toward the visible and resilient. Shells, spines, and dense tissues dominated records. Transparency went underreported not because it was rare, but because it did not survive the methods used to find it. An entire category of life slipped through both nets and attention. This bias shaped understanding for decades. The deep ocean was imagined as sparsely populated, inhabited mainly by tough, slow-moving creatures built to endure pressure and cold. The idea that delicate, almost invisible animals could thrive there remained counterintuitive, unsupported by physical specimens. The limitation was not curiosity, but technology. Nets could only capture what could be captured. They erased the very traits that defined some of the most successful deep-sea strategies. Transparency, flexibility, and fragility were incompatible with tools built for retrieval rather than observation. Change began when cameras descended instead of nets. Early imaging systems were crude, offering brief glimpses through grainy black and white footage. Even so, they revealed shapes that had no place in previous collections. Faint outlines drifted past lenses. Pulses of light illuminated bodies that seemed to vanish as they moved. As camera technology improved, the picture sharpened. High sensitivity sensors captured low light environments without disturbing them. Pressure resistant housings allowed long observations at depth. Remote operated vehicles maneuvered slowly, preserving the delicate balance of the water around them. What emerged was a crowded world: transparent fish, drifting crustaceans, gelatinous predators, all present in numbers that contradicted earlier assumptions. Life had not been scarce, it had been overlooked. These observations forced a re-evaluation of past conclusions. The deep ocean was not defined solely by endurance and hardness, it was shaped by subtlety. Transparency was not an anomaly, but a dominant trait in certain layers and communities. Technology revealed what earlier tools erased. By observing rather than collecting, scientists began to see life as it existed rather than as it survived extraction. Transparent animals no longer had to withstand capture to be recognized. They only had to exist within view. This shift altered more than species lists. It changed the understanding of deep sea ecology itself. Interactions once thought rare became common. Strategies once considered marginal emerged as central. The history of discovery here is also a lesson. Absence in records does not always mean absence in reality. Sometimes it reflects the blind spots of the instruments used. Transparent life was not hidden by the ocean alone. It was hidden by the tools designed to reveal it. Depth does not favor variety equally. It narrows possibility. As life descends, conditions strip away traits that once worked and quietly preserve those that can tolerate the long pressures of darkness, scarcity, and exposure. What remains is not random, it is filtered. In the deep sea, selection acts less like competition and more like erosion. Traits that require frequent input fade first. Brightness loses meaning where light rarely returns. Display no longer attracts mates or warns rivals. Color drains away, not as sudden loss, but as gradual irrelevance. Pigment thins until it disappears, leaving bodies that no longer announce themselves. Strength follows a similar path. Force demands energy, armor demands maintenance, speed demands fuel. In an environment where food arrives unpredictably, these traits grow costly. The deep does not reward the ability to overpower. It rewards the ability to endure. Muscles shrink, structures soften. The emphasis shifts away from domination toward persistence. This filtering is relentless but gentle. It does not eliminate entire lineages overnight. It simply reduces the success of forms that rely on intensity. Over time, those forms become rarer, then absent. What survives are bodies that operate quietly, spending little and signaling less. Subtlety rises in their place. Transparency persists because it interferes least with the environment. Slow movement persists because it draws minimal attention. Flexible tissues persist because they tolerate pressure without constant repair. Traits that function passively last longer than those that demand action. The deep sea does not require animals to be extraordinary. It requires them to be compatible. Bodies that align with its constraints pass through the filter. Those that resist are gradually removed, not by a single failure, but by accumulated disadvantage. This process creates a distinctive biological landscape. Many species appear similar in broad strategy, even if they are unrelated. Convergence becomes common. The filter does not care about ancestry. It preserves outcomes. Over time, different starting points arrive at similar solutions because the same pressures act everywhere below. Brightness fades because it has no return. Strength fades because it costs too much. Complexity fades where it adds risk without benefit. What remains is not simplicity for its own sake, but efficiency shaped by necessity. Subtlety persists because it solves multiple problems at once. A subtle body avoids detection, conserves energy, tolerates pressure, and functions within scarcity. It survives not by excelling in one domain, but by avoiding excess in all. This filtering does not end, it continues at every depth, refining what can exist there. Even within the deep, shallower and deeper layers apply slightly different constraints, producing gradients rather than boundaries. But the overall direction remains consistent. The deep sea shapes life by narrowing the range of viable traits. It removes the loud, the heavy, and the demanding. What remains is quiet, restrained, and persistent. Through this long process, evolution leaves behind a community defined less by what it displays than by what it no longer needs. Multiple forces converge as depth increases, and none of them relax their hold. Predators remain present, moving patiently through thinning light. Illumination continues to weaken, narrowing how vision operates rather than removing it entirely. Energy grows scarcer, limiting how much any body can spend on movement, structure, or repair. Together, these pressures reshape what works. Predation does not vanish with darkness. It becomes more selective. Hunters rely on contrast, motion, and interruption instead of color. A body that blocks light or reflects it strongly stands out, regardless of how dim the surroundings become. As depth increases, the margin for error shrinks. Any signal sent into the environment persists longer because so few others exist to mask it. At the same time, light fades in a predictable way. It no longer fills space. It arrives from limited angles and travels shorter distances. This creates a visual field where outlines matter more than surfaces. Transparency directly addresses this condition. When light passes through a body instead of stopping at its edge, outlines soften. The visual signal weakens at its source. Energy scarcity reinforces this shift. Every additional structure demands maintenance. Dense tissue costs fuel. Frequent movement increases metabolic drain. Transparency aligns naturally with lower energy demand. Bodies composed largely of water cost less to build and less to sustain. Reduced pigment, thinner tissues, and simplified organization all contribute to a smaller energetic footprint. These pressures do not act independently, they stack. A body that reduces visibility also saves energy. A body that saves energy can afford slower movement. Slower movement produces fewer visual disturbances. Fewer disturbances reduce detection risk. Each adjustment supports the others, forming a stable solution that performs well across multiple constraints. Depth intensifies this alignment. Near the surface, trade-offs exist. Color can still communicate. Armor can still deter. Speed can still rescue. As depth increases, these options close one by one. The environment removes alternatives until only a narrow set of traits remains viable. Transparency occupies that remaining space. It does not require constant action. It does not depend on timing or opportunity. It operates continuously, passively, across long periods of stillness. It reduces risk without demanding response. This is why transparency increases gradually rather than appearing suddenly. Each additional meter of depth strengthens the same pressures. Predators remain. Light diminishes further. Energy thins. Partial transparency becomes useful, then necessary, then dominant. The mechanics are quiet but precise. Light behavior dictates visibility. Metabolism dictates cost. Predation dictates consequence. Transparency intersects all three. It weakens visual detection. lowers energetic demand, and reduces the likelihood of encounter. Few traits offer such broad coverage. As depth increases, bodies that do not converge toward this solution face accumulating disadvantage. They reflect too much light, they require too much fuel, they announce themselves too clearly. Over time, they fail to persist. Invisibility does not replace every other strategy, but it solves more constraints at once than any alternative. In the deep, where pressures overlap and options narrow, evolution favors solutions that work everywhere, all the time. Transparency meets that requirement. It increases with depth because the environment leaves fewer other choices. Silence defines the deep more than darkness ever could. Not an absence of sound alone, but a reduction of events. In this vast volume of water, moments of contact are infrequent. Bodies pass without meeting. Lives unfold without collision. Space stretches, encounters thin until they become exceptions rather than expectations. In such an environment, movement is conservative. Motion does not flow continuously, but occurs in brief, deliberate intervals, a slow pulse, a gentle adjustment, then stillness again. Water itself is rarely disturbed. Currents move steadily, carrying particles and organisms alike, but individual action remains restrained. To move is to alter the quiet balance, and alteration carries consequence. When encounters do happen, they are brief and decisive. There is little posturing, little warning. A presence detected is a presence already too close. This compresses interaction into narrow windows where hesitation offers no advantage. The safest encounter is the one that never forms. Because of this, drawing attention becomes the greatest risk. Any signal released into the environment may travel farther than intended. A movement displaces water. A body interrupts light. A sound vibrates outward. In a place with so few competing signals, these disturbances stand out sharply. Silence is not passive here, it is maintained. Behavior adapts accordingly. Many deep-sea animals drift rather than swim, allowing the environment to carry them. When they do move, they do so slowly, matching the pace of the water around them. Sudden acceleration is avoided. Even feeding behaviors are shaped by restraint, relying on proximity rather than pursuit. Transparency supports this quiet existence by reducing the need for constant correction. A body that interferes less with light and water can remain present without being registered. It can occupy space without announcing itself. In silence, invisibility amplifies caution rather than replacing it. This behavioral stillness reinforces the broader rhythm of the deep. Without daily cycles to synchronize activity, life spreads action thinly across time. Rest and movement blur together. There is no rush to exploit fleeting moments. Everything unfolds at a pace that avoids notice. Predators adapt to this silence as well. They do not chase frequently. They wait, they align. They rely on patience rather than exertion. Prey responds by minimizing signals even further. The entire system settles into mutual restraint, shaped by the understanding that exposure carries cost. Over time, this produces an environment where absence becomes normal, not emptiness, but spacing. Life exists everywhere, yet rarely intersects. The ocean is full, yet encounters remain scarce. Silence is not imposed, it is selected. Transparency fits seamlessly into this world. It allows bodies to exist within silence rather than disrupt it. A transparent form does not break the visual calm. It supports stillness by remaining undefined. In a place where being noticed can mean ending, fading into the background becomes a form of participation. This is a world built not on dominance or speed, but on discretion. Quiet survival depends on leaving no trace, on passing through moments without marking them. In the deep sea, silence is structure, and transparency is one way life learns to respect it. In the deep ocean, survival sheds its familiar meanings. It no longer favors those that project strength, speed, or presence. Instead, it bends toward endurance, toward remaining unchanged through long stretches of time. Life here does not advance by winning encounters, but by avoiding them. On land and near the surface, existence is loud by necessity. Signals compete constantly. Color advertises, sound travels, movement asserts ownership of space. To survive is often to be noticed first or most clearly. The deep sea slowly inverts that logic. As light thins and encounters grow rare, the value of signaling weakens. A signal cannot guarantee a response, but it can guarantee exposure. In an environment where information travels far and substitutes are few, releasing unnecessary cues becomes a liability. Silence, once optional, becomes protective. Reducing signals reshapes behavior, form, and interaction. Movement slows because it need not impress. Displays vanish because there is little audience to receive them. Presence itself becomes negotiable. To exist without declaring existence offers a kind of safety unavailable to louder strategies. This shift alters how success is measured. Longevity replaces dominance. Stability replaces conquest. A body that persists quietly through scarcity outperforms one that burns brightly and disappears. The deep does not reward dramatic moments. It rewards continuity. Endurance thrives on restraint. By limiting what they emit into the environment, organisms reduce the number of relationships they must manage. Fewer signals mean fewer responses, fewer pursuits, fewer mistakes. Survival becomes an act of subtraction rather than accumulation. Transparency fits naturally within this philosophy. It does not shout or even whisper. It simply refrains from interfering. It allows bodies to participate in the environment without reshaping it. In doing so, it aligns existence with background rather than foreground. The deeper life descends, the less it announces itself, because announcement carries no advantage. There is no crowd to persuade, no territory to defend through display alone. There is only time, pressure, and limited energy. Under those conditions, visibility becomes excess. This does not mean life disappears. It means it chooses to remain unresolved. Forms blur, boundaries soften, presence becomes conditional. Life continues, not by asserting itself, but by blending into the long quiet around it. Such strategies feel counterintuitive from a surface perspective. Human survival has long depended on signaling to others, on cooperation through recognition, but the deep ocean operates outside that framework. There, the safest relationship is often distance. The safest interaction is avoidance. Over evolutionary time, this philosophy becomes embodied. Bodies adapt to express less, behaviors compress into efficiency. Signals are reduced to what is strictly necessary for reproduction or feeding, and even those are muted, brief, and rare. The deep sea teaches that survival is not always about overcoming challenges directly. Sometimes it is about stepping aside from them. By reducing signals, life reduces opportunities for conflict. By remaining indistinct, it buys time. As depth increases, the environment narrows the path forward. Loud strategies fall away. persistent ones remain. In that narrowing, life reveals another way to continue, not through dominance, but through quiet endurance, carried forward by doing less and lasting longer. Success in the deep ocean is measured on a different scale. It is not counted in speed, reach, or force. It accumulates quietly, over time, through continued existence. To persist without interruption becomes the mark of achievement. This reframing reshapes how traits are valued. Size offers no guarantee. Power invites cost. Visibility attracts consequence. What matters instead is the ability to remain intact across long intervals of scarcity, pressure, and uncertainty. Survival becomes less about winning moments and more about avoiding losses. Transparency alters the meaning of success by challenging the assumption that presence must be asserted. In many environments, success is associated with impact, with leaving a mark, with being noticed. In the deep, leaving fewer marks can be safer. Reducing presence does not signal weakness. It signals alignment with the environment. Persistence depends on minimizing risk rather than maximizing advantage. A body that erases its outline avoids unnecessary encounters. A form that fades into background conditions reduces the number of decisions it must survive. Over time, fewer encounters mean fewer chances to fail. Survival stretches forward quietly. This approach changes the shape of evolutionary outcomes. The most successful forms are not always those that dominate interactions, but those that limit them. By disappearing from notice, organisms avoid contests they do not need to win. They remove themselves from pressures that would otherwise demand costly responses. Transparency embodies this philosophy. It is not an active defense. It does not strike back. It simply declines to participate in the visual economy of its surroundings. In doing so, it sidesteps many of the forces that shorten lifespans. It trades spectacle for continuity. Over long timescales, this trade proves effective. Generations accumulate without dramatic events. Lineages persist without becoming prominent. Success becomes invisible from the outside, measurable only by endurance. This redefinition extends beyond individual traits. It reframes what it means to adapt. Adaptation is often imagined as improvement, as adding capabilities or complexity. In the deep sea, adaptation frequently involves subtraction. Features are reduced, signals are muted, structures are simplified. What remains works not because it excels, but because it interferes least. Disappearing becomes a way to belong. By erasing presence, organisms fit more seamlessly into their environment. They are carried by it rather than set against it. Survival aligns with context instead of opposing it. This lesson unsettles surface expectations. It suggests that success is not universal in its expression. What works in one setting may fail in another. The deep ocean reveals a version of success built on restraint, patience, and invisibility. Here, persistence outweighs dominance. Continuity outperforms intensity. Transparency reframes survival as a long, quiet agreement with conditions rather than a series of confrontations. Disappearing does not mean vanishing from existence. It means choosing a form of presence that does not demand attention. In a world shaped by silence and scarcity, that choice allows life to continue, uninterrupted, carried forward by doing less and lasting longer. Maps of the deep ocean still contain vast blank spaces, not margins awaiting refinement, but entire regions never observed directly. Depth stretches beyond routine access, and even with modern tools, most of the sea floor and midwater remain untouched by sustained observation. Knowledge arrives in fragments rather than panoramas. Exploration has always lagged behind existence here. The scale is immense, the conditions unforgiving, and the cost of extended presence remains high. Each descent captures only a thin slice of space and time. Cameras glimpse passing forms, then withdraw. Instruments record signals, then fall silent again. What lies between these moments remains largely unknown. Despite this, discoveries continue. Transparent species still emerge from footage and collections, sometimes identified years after they were first recorded. Subtle shapes, once dismissed as artifacts, resolve into organisms when technology improves or perspectives shift. With each advance, the pattern strengthens rather than closes. Transparency appears again, in new contexts, at new depths. These findings suggest continuity rather than exception. The strategies already described do not belong to a limited set of species. They represent a broader logic still unfolding across environments rarely seen. Each new discovery reinforces the sense that what has been observed so far is only a portion of what exists. The challenge lies not only in reaching these environments, but in recognizing what is there. Transparent life tests the limits of detection. It blends into the medium it inhabits. It occupies the space between light and absence. Even when present, it can be overlooked, misidentified, or erased by the act of observation itself. Technological progress narrows this gap, but slowly. Longer deployments, quieter vehicles, higher sensitivity sensors all reveal more, yet they still sample sparsely. The deep ocean does not yield its patterns quickly. It requires patience equal to its scale. As understanding grows, so does restraint. Scientists increasingly treat absence cautiously, aware that missing evidence may reflect unseen presence rather than emptiness. This shift changes how conclusions are formed. It leaves room for structures not yet resolved and strategies not yet cataloged. Transparency, in particular, suggests that much of deep sea life remains visually elusive by design. The more refined observation becomes, the more apparent it is how many organisms have evolved to exist below thresholds of easy detection. Discovery does not move toward completion, but toward deeper appreciation of limits. This incompleteness does not weaken what is known, it frames it. The patterns observed are strong precisely because they persist across partial data. Each new glimpse aligns with what came before, extending rather than contradicting it. The deep ocean remains a world in progress, not in formation, but in understanding. Its logic is consistent, its inhabitants persistent, its reach vast. What has been seen is enough to reveal direction, but not extent. For now, the unseen outweighs the known. Transparent life continues to surface into awareness in brief moments of clarity. Between those moments, the ocean keeps its silence, carrying patterns forward beyond the edges of observation, waiting for attention that moves as patiently as the depths themselves. The deep sea offers its lesson without emphasis. It does not announce conclusions or demand attention. It simply presents a way of living that has persisted quietly, shaped by conditions that reward restraint over display. In that darkness, life does not escalate, it refines. Across depth, complexity does not always accumulate. In many cases, it dissolves into something leaner. Features that once mattered lose relevance. Signals fade, structures soften. What remains is not diminished, but tuned. Life grows simpler not through loss alone, but through alignment with what endures. This simplicity is not emptiness, it is focus. Energy flows into persistence rather than performance. Forms settle into balance with scarcity, pressure, and silence. The deep shows that survival does not require constant expression, it requires continuity. In environments closer to the surface, success often looks dramatic. Growth is visible, competition is active, signals multiply. Those patterns feel intuitive because they mirror human experience. Yet the deep ocean follows a different logic. It reveals that visibility is optional and that thriving can occur without prominence. Here, life survives by becoming harder to notice, not because it retreats from existence, but because it integrates more completely with its surroundings. Bodies dissolve into gradients, movement blends with currents, presence becomes conditional and fluid, survival unfolds without spectacle. This path is not lesser, it is simply quieter. It values duration over intensity. It measures success not in moments captured, but in time sustained. The deep sea reminds us that life does not need to grow louder to continue. It only needs to remain compatible with its world. There is humility in this lesson. It counters the idea that progress must be marked by expansion or escalation. Instead, it suggests that longevity may depend on knowing when to subtract, when to soften, when to step back from attention. The deep ocean carries countless lives that will never be seen clearly, never named, never photographed in full detail. Yet they persist, generation after generation, shaped by principles that do not rely on recognition. Their success is quiet, but undeniable. This lesson extends beyond the sea. It reflects a broader truth about life under constraint. When resources narrow and conditions intensify, survival often favors those who reduce friction rather than create force. It favors adaptation that removes strain instead of adding strength. The deep sea reveals another path, one where endurance is achieved through subtlety. It shows that existence does not always require assertion. Sometimes it requires yielding just enough to remain. Life does not always grow louder. Sometimes it grows simpler. Sometimes it survives by becoming harder to notice. In the calm persistence of the deep, that lesson remains, carried forward in bodies that leave little trace, yet continue all the same, moving quietly through a world that values what lasts over what shines. The planet has never offered its answers all at once. It reveals them slowly, often only when methods become gentle enough to listen rather than extract. Transparency is one such answer, but it is far from the only one. It stands as a reminder that many solutions exist beyond immediate perception. Across the deepest parts of the ocean, countless adaptations remain unseen, not because they are rare, but because they are subtle. Life has learned to work within silence, pressure, and scarcity in ways that leave little trace. Forms persist that do not announce themselves through size, brightness, or force. Their success unfolds quietly, measured in continuity rather than visibility. The deepest places still shape life without spectacle. Evolution there proceeds without witnesses, guided by constraints that remove excess and reward compatibility. Bodies soften, signals fade, interactions compress. Over long spans of time, these pressures sculpt organisms that fit their environments so closely that they become difficult to separate from them. This presents a challenge not only for exploration, but for understanding itself. Human knowledge is built around what can be observed clearly. It favors contrast, structure, and repetition. Transparent life and other subtle adaptations resist that framework. They exist at the edge of detection, asking for patience rather than capture. What remains unseen is not a void. It is a reservoir of strategies refined beyond the surface imagination. For every adaptation cataloged, others persist without names or descriptions, shaped by conditions few instruments have lingered within. The deep ocean continues to act on life even when no cameras descend, refining forms that may never cross into record. This reveals something about us as well. We tend to equate knowledge with completeness, visibility with understanding, yet the deep reminds us that much of the world operates beyond those assumptions. Processes continue without acknowledgement, life adapts without display, answers accumulate without being presented. We are only beginning to notice how much has been overlooked. Each advance in observation exposes both discovery and limitation. What comes into view suggests a broader pattern still unfolding out of sight. Transparency shows that survival can depend on remaining unnoticed. Other adaptations likely follow similar principles, solving problems quietly, efficiently, and without leaving obvious markers. The planet keeps hiding its answers, not out of secrecy, but because it does not shape itself for our convenience. Its deepest systems move slowly, guided by pressures indifferent to recognition. They shape life, whether or not anyone is watching. This realization does not diminish what is known. It places it within a larger context. Understanding becomes an ongoing process rather than a destination. It invites humility and patience, qualities that match the environments being studied. Transparency is a glimpse, not a conclusion. Many other answers remain dissolved in darkness, carried forward by the same forces that shaped what has already been found. The deepest places continue their work in silence. We are only beginning to notice the paths life has taken there, and only beginning to learn how much remains beyond sight.